All right. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending upon where you are. My name is Jason Strait with the Cloud PaaS Virtual Group. We're here today for the presentation IaaS or PaaS Managed Instance, Azure DB or Azure VM, why, when, and what. And our presenter today is Michelle. Michelle will be running her presentation here in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to go through a couple announcements regarding our virtual group. So to begin with, the virtual group is brought to you by Spotlight Cloud. Spotlight Cloud is the first Azure-hosted database performance monitoring solution focused on SQL Server customers. Leverages scalability, performance, and built-in security of Azure Cosmos DB. Spotlight combines the best of the cloud with Quest's engineering insights from years of building database performance management tools. PaaS does have a large number of other virtual groups, so I encourage you to take a look at those as well. There's some that are language focused, technology, and just job role focused, giving you the opportunity to really look across the spectrum and learn quite a bit about data platforms. Now, if you do have any questions or anything that you want to share, there is the chat that you can use throughout to share your own anecdotes related to the topics at hand if you want all the attendees to see those. Alternatively, if you do want to participate in the Q&A with the presenter at the end, there's the Q&A panel, so you can just type in your questions there and we will go through them at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Michelle. So let me make Michelle the presenter for her presentation today, IaaS or PaaS. One moment here, let me make her presenter.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Gutzait, and I'm a Microsoft Data Platform Architect. I have been working for the past 10 years for Pythian. Pythian is a Canadian company headquartered in Ottawa with 5 offices around the world. We provide 24/7 services to thousands of clients in databases, DevOps, big data, data science, cloud, and more. So today I'm going to talk about the options for moving your SQL Server database or databases or instances into Azure. So let's assume that you have decided to move to Azure, but you're not sure which option to choose. So I'm going to cover the differences between the options and how to choose the right one for you. Are you already in the cloud? So if you are, just remember that each cloud platform has their own structure, their own architecture, and their own features that they provide. So if this is your first time with Azure, you need to make sure that you understand what are your options on Azure. Just remember that Azure is a lot more than just databases. So when you're considering moving to Azure, you should consider also moving to Azure, the application layer, and more. And you need to think about additional things like network security and other things that I'm not going to cover in this presentation. The only thing I'm covering here is how to choose the right option for your database. But there is a lot of research that needs to be done around moving to Azure. So how easy is it to migrate your database or database server into the cloud? So this really depends on the option that you're choosing, and this is also something that I'm covering in this presentation. Remember that the way that SQL Server works is that your data can reside anywhere. So it can be on a physical server or a virtual machine on premises, or it can be a virtual machine in Azure, or just a database in the cloud in Azure. And Microsoft has made it very, very easy because it really from development perspective, from the application perspective, once everything is set, it really doesn't matter where your database is, because you have the same tools that are going to connect to your database, the same management tools, and everything is the same. So it's kind of transparent to you where your database is. But when you choose the option on Azure, there will be some features that will not be the same between the options. And again, I'm going to cover this during this presentation. Just to remember that the strength of the Microsoft Azure is that there are many data centers around the world. And this is, for example, the map for 2017. As you can see, you have data centers across North America, and you have Europe, and you have others. And this is very important when you choose your option, because, for example, if your data resides in a country where you do not want anybody else to be able to view your data, just remember that there are some countries, for example, in China, there's a rule that anything hosted in China, the government can have access to the data, and you cannot encrypt the data from your government. So when you choose the location of where to place your Azure database or server, you need to take this into consideration. But the strength of this is also that you can have more than one data center, and make sure that you have your high availability and disaster recovery in place within Azure. And I'm going to cover this as well. So what are the advantages of moving to Azure? So let's say that you have an application that on premises, and let's say that it's a new application, and you need to you know that it's going to be big application and big database. So what you need to do, you need to go and purchase the hardware, and you need to make sure that the system administration group, they configure everything for you, network, security, all the infrastructure. Then you have the operating system, and you need to make sure that everything is properly configured and so forth. So sometimes this process may take time because you need to purchase the hardware. Maybe you need, maybe you already have production and you need to make sure that you have newer hardware. So all this has its costs, and also it takes time. So the advantages of Azure and any cloud is that everything is very, very fast. So you have a dashboard, you want a VM now, you click, and in minutes you have a new server, or you have a new database. So very fast deployment of the application. And we're going to talk later about the price, but people sometimes see the price and they say, oh my God, this is very expensive. But if you think about everything else around the application and what, or the database server and what has been built, everything is time, money, resources. So fast deployment of applications. Also, you have built-in disaster recovery and high availability options that you don't have to manage depending on the option that you're choosing. Microsoft has invested a lot of money on security to make sure that the Azure environment is very secured. So sometimes people ask me, is Azure more secure than on-prem? Well, it's very hard to answer that, but usually because it's Microsoft and they know how to protect their environment, probably the best, it makes sense that the security is going to be even better than what you have on premises. And manageability. There's built-in support depending on the option that you choose. There's built-in support for patching, for example. log analytics, and you can monitor your database. You can see the metrics of the usage, resource usage of your databases on Azure, which on premises you will probably have to buy a third-party tool. On Azure, this is built in. There are also the flexibility of scaling up and down as you need, and pay for what you need or what you use. So this is dynamic, and I'm going to cover this as well. And the last one is the overall cost. If you think about how much money you're spending on everything else in the environment, if you're going to compare this, you're going to see that in the long run, you're going to save a lot of money. Again, on a team, on the hardware, on the processes, and so forth. So let's talk about the cloud models. So the model that we know when we have on-premises environment is that we manage everything. We manage the network, the storage, the servers, the virtual servers if we have, the operating system, and everything else. So that's on the left. Then we have another, on the cloud we have IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, where Microsoft manages everything below the operating system. So you don't have to care about networking and storage and servers and virtualization. You do have to take care of the networking just to make sure from your end, so you have to make sure that you have the proper setup between your on-premises to the cloud if this is the case. But on the Microsoft side, you don't have to. On Azure, you don't have to manage those. They're managed for you. And so you have to manage the operating system and above. The next one is platform as a service, where Microsoft manages everything up to the data itself, data and application itself. So you don't have to manage. So they provide you with an environment that they patch and they maintain, and you only need your database environment to be managed and the applications. And then there's the last one, where software as a service, that I'm not going to cover here, which is Microsoft manages everything. So the only ones that I'm going to cover are the two middle one, the IaaS and the PaaS. So if we look at, obviously there are more to it, so there are a lot of components to Azure platform. So I'm only going to cover Azure SQL Database and virtual machines that contain SQL Server instance or instances. So let's discuss the cloud options that we have for SQL Server Database. So the first one would be the Azure virtual machine. So this looks more or less like our machine or virtual machine on premises. And then we have the PaaS, which is Azure Database. It's just a database in the cloud. And we have three options for that. So we have Azure SQL Database, or Singleton, which is just a database in the cloud. It's a unit. It is not related to anything else. You don't have multiple databases, so your application only knows a database in the cloud. Then you have the managed instance, which is a new it's a new type that we have, which is still PaaS, but it looks more more similar to the SQL Server instance. And I'm going to detail each one of those options. Then when you have Azure SQL Database like a Singleton, what happens is that you have to allocate specific resources to that database. And then Microsoft came up with another type of PaaS environment that is called Database Elastic Pool, where you can gather a few databases in the same pool that get resources allocated to it to save cost. And I'm going to describe all those. So let's start with the IaaS. So this is a virtual machine, so it's very easy. So if, for example, you already have a production environment on-prem, it's very easy to just lift and shift the environment. So that means that you can take a virtual machine with a SQL Server instance or SQL Server instances and just move the same virtual machine to the cloud. You don't have to take care, you don't have to replace or place databases in a different architecture. You just move your machine as it is to the cloud, to Azure. It's very easy to just deploy virtual machines and they're ready in minutes, so you don't have to wait for anything. And then you can basically, you decide on the tier, and I'm going to talk about the tiers, and you can scale up or down the resources within a tier. So there are specific rules for that, but you can start with low amount of resources and then you can scale up dynamically within a tier. It's very secured and trusted. It's Microsoft, it's Windows. And this is a very important part of why to choose a virtual machine over the other options. It's because, let's say that you have SQL Server 2005 that is no longer supported. You cannot have SQL Server 2005 in PaaS because it's not supported anymore. And so if you do have that, you can just create a virtual machine in Azure and install your own SQL 2005 SQL Server instance. Just note that you may not be as protected as if it's a supported version because Microsoft doesn't apply any security patches at all, but it's the same as on-prem. And when we're talking about Azure, we know that when you have something on-prem, you need to take care of the tuning of the hardware, the tuning of the virtual environment if you have that. So when you build a machine, everything is built in a way that it will the SQL Server will perform the most optimally. Again, here you can pay per minute or you can bring your own license because we're talking about SQL Server instances and Windows. So you can bring your own licenses if you wish. And this one has 3 tiers: basic, low priority, and standard. Now we're going to talk about the tiers because with each one of the option, you have different type of tiers and you need to understand what they mean. Let's move on to PaaS. So PaaS or Azure SQL Database deployment options, you have 3. So you have the managed instance that looks like a SQL Server instance, but it doesn't have the 100% compatibility. It only has most of the compatibility, so it's very similar to an instance, but there are a few things that it cannot support or it does not support. And I'm going to talk about the differences between managed instance and the other 2. Then you have the single tone database, which is a database with its own resources allocated, and it's managed via a logical server, but everything is transparent to you because you only have a database in the cloud. You don't have an instance. So there are no system databases in there. And many things that you can do on a SQL Server instance will not apply to a single tone database. But what happens if you have many single databases and you don't know or you cannot allocate a specific amount of resources to one database because it will cost you a lot? Let's say that you have multiple databases that have different type of loads and you're not sure how many resources to allocate to one database, and you don't want to pay too much. So you can basically group them in an elastic pool and allocate resources to that pool and pay for the entire thing. So if one database needs resources at a specific point in time, it will get them. We just need to make sure that you don't have many databases in that pool with intense load at the same time, because they may affect each other's performance. So this is good for databases that are not very intensively used, but they're used in different times so that you can allocate resources. And again, this is also flexible because you can scale up or down with each one of those options. So for example, if you have a single database that with allocated resources to it, and you know, for example, that it has very intense load, let's say every night, you can scale the resources down and up automatically via scripts. The same for elastic pools. A single database can be moved into and out of the elastic pool. Okay, so let's say that you have a few elastic pools and one database requires more resources. You can always create an elastic pool, a new elastic pool that will have more resources allocated to it, and you can move the database between those. So you can move a single database into elastic pool and outside of a pool. Just remember that there's not going to be a downtime meanwhile the database is moving, but at the last stage of the move, you will have a short downtime. So the move can take a long time, but the switch will need a downtime and from your users, but will be faster. So you don't have to actually wait. Let's say that you have a 1 terabyte database. You don't have to disconnect the users when you move from elastic pool to single or vice versa. So what's the actual difference if we summarize between the single database and elastic pool? A single-tone database has dedicated resources to a database. And this is good when you have a detailed workload pattern. So for example, if you have the same workload all day long and it's intense, this may be the solution for your database. Elastic Pool, as opposed to that, supports multiple single databases with unpredictable varying workload. So usually it's going to be when you have 3 or more databases. Otherwise, there's no point in moving them to an elastic pool. And you need to make sure that the load is unpredictable or varying. And you need to make sure that the databases are also don't affect each other's performance. And if they do, that is not a problem for you. So just to complicate things, Microsoft has come up with two models for price, two price model or two tiers, not tiers but two price models. One is the DTU, that it's offering a blend of compute, memory, and I/O resources. Okay, and this was the first model that Microsoft had. And it has 3 tiers: basic, standard, and premium. So as you can see, this is different than the VM. And the compute size in each tier that is provided here, like basic, standard, and premium, provides different mix of these resources. Okay, so Microsoft also, I'm going to talk about that, provided a tool on more or less how to calculate the DTU model or tier that you need. But I think it was realized that it's very hard to understand DTU. And so Microsoft came up with a new model, which is the vCore. And it just lets you choose a number of vCores, the amount of memory, and the amount and speed of storage. So this is easier to understand when you're talking about machines. Let's talk about managed instances. So managed instances is still a PaaS. So that means if you remember the model, that Microsoft manages everything up to the instance. So it's not a VM, it's an instance. It's still being patched for you, it's still being managed for you, but from your point of view, it's going to be like an instance. So you do have access to system database. There are a few features that are not supported by this. It also has, because it's a new model, it also has native VNet implementation. So if you research about network, or if you start dealing with network, this feature makes it easier to implement managed instances. Because when you have a single database, either it is a single tone or in an elastic pool, you need to create endpoints, and the network to that is a little bit, the configuration of the network is a little bit more complicated than in managed instances. So again, to complicate, managed instances is available in 2 service tiers. So we have general purpose, which is designed for most of the application. Those are typical performance requirements. So it's not an intensive, very intense load. And so it's a high performance premium storage from Azure, which is 8 terabyte. And there's a built-in high availability based on Azure storage, the premium storage, and the Azure Service Fabric. So I'm going to talk about high availability later, but basically they separated the executable from the storage, and what is being replicated is the storage in this type. And then you have the business critical, which is for applications or database applications with low latency. So this is the more performant tier, and it's designed for business application with highest performance and high availability requirements. It comes with a super fast SSD storage, which is up to 1 terabyte on generation 4, and then there's the new generation 5, where the storage is up to 4 terabytes. And then you have built-in availability based on always-on availability groups on this one. And so in the general purpose, it's storage replication, and in this one, it's always-on availability groups and the service fabric. So you still have a separate management for the executable versus the storage, but you also have on top of this, you have always-on. So you also have in this tier, you can have a read-only database replica that can be used for reporting. So if you are using high availability with always-on right now, you will understand. So this is the same architecture as it's just using the availability groups. And it also has in-memory OLTP feature, and this is for very high performance requirements. So based on this, it could be assumed that the general purpose is a standard edition and business critical is kind of an enterprise edition of SQL Server. Both service tiers, they guarantee 99.99% availability, so 4 nines. And you can also change independently, you can change the storage size and the compute capacity. So I will show you when we'll talk about the price calculator how this works. Also, you will see next that with PaaS, this is the availability that you get, 4 nines for any PaaS. And right now, you cannot, for example, if you have a managed instance in general purpose, you cannot switch to business critical without downtime or easily, and vice versa. It's a full migration if you want to move between them. So you need to choose carefully which one you want. Always remember that if you choose the model where you pay as you go, you can shut down machines if they're not being used. So let's talk about the high availability a little bit. So with the service fabric, there's a split between the tier that is managing the executable and the tier that is managing storage, and this gives you a lot of leeway with managing availability, failovers and high availability. So when we're talking about the basic standard and general purpose service tier, it's just a replicated storage. So if anything happens, you always have your data somewhere else. Okay. With Premium and Business Critical, it's always on availability groups with replicated storage. So again, you have the service tier that the service fabric that is in charge of making sure that everything works, and if something happens, it knows to fail over. With Premium and Business Critical, it's always on availability groups as well. So it's another layer of availability groups of availability. Then in the Premium, you have availability groups, but in the Business Critical, you have availability groups with read-only replica. So it's even more, so you can have reporting on top of the high availability. By default, when we're talking about high availability, by default, it's going to be in the same data center. So if you have database, let's say in the basic, standard, and general purpose service tiers, the storage is going to be replicated within the same Microsoft data center. But you can change this and you can have multiple locations. So for example, if you're in East US, you can choose your redundant data center to be West US and so forth. Or you can decide to replicate to another country if your security regulations allow that. So I talked about the service fabric. So there are additional topics that are not discussed here, like I said, network security, application stack, identity management. So if you are using identity management software like Citrix, this can still be used on Azure, and we do have clients that use Citrix in the cloud, but this topic was not covered here. And also how to migrate. This is not covered in this session. And the migration itself is a big topic by itself. So once you decide what to do, you need to learn how to migrate, because, for example, when we're talking about PaaS or single-tone database, you cannot just back up and restore your database. So you need to find the right option for you based on the downtime that you can afford. So this is a big topic, and probably more things that you probably have a lot of questions, but I'm just covering the basics here. So let's compare between the solutions, and these are only going to be some guidelines. So Microsoft has, I posted the link here if you get the slides. Microsoft has posted a lot of documentation regarding guidelines and the comparison. So for example, in this case, you see the type of systems to move and where to. So they tell you, okay, move to a managed instance, this type of application, to a virtual machine, this type of application, and so forth. It talks about the licensing and pricing models that I summarize in this presentation, how to calculate the overall costs when you move to Azure. It's talking about the SLAs and where to start. Also, Microsoft provides this link where you can see which type of features are not supported and are supported in each one of the options. So for example, if you know, let's say that you're using file stream data type, just know that it's not supported with PaaS. That's just an example. Or if your application has cross-database queries where you're using the 3-part names. That's not going to work on PaaS, but there's always a solution and a workaround for any of those. You just need to make the modification. So you need to decide if you, for example, if you decided to go to a singleton database or elastic pool, you may need to make some modifications to your application, but everything has a solution. So let's talk about the main differences. There are a lot of main differences. There are a lot of differences, so I try to just collect the ones that I think are important, but you need to review the previous link and make sure that your application is compatible with the solution that you would like to use. So the first one is that on the VM you have full control over everything. So you have full control of the operating system. You can install additional application even though it's not recommended based on the best practices, but you can do whatever you want. It's your machine. Okay, so you have full control and also full control of the instance. But you only have, this is what Microsoft has in the documentation, the SLA is 99.95% availability versus on PaaS you have 99.99, so 4 nines, so a little bit more than a virtual machine. So I'm going back to the first one. So Managed Instance is highly compatible with SQL Server on premises, and the single database or elastic pool, only the most commonly used SQL Server's features are available. So because it's just a database, it's not an instance, a lot of the features that are cross-database or instance-wise, they're not supported with that architecture. Let's go to the third one. So any version is okay because you have a VM and you can do whatever you want. On the managed instance and single database, right now the lowest compatibility level is 100. That means SQL Server 2008 R2 or 2008. You also have built-in backups, patching, recovery in PaaS. So Microsoft is managing everything for you behind the scenes. So on the, let's go to the next one. So on VM, you have your instance. So you already know how to manage, and you understand what's a SQL Server instance or instances within a VM. But with managed instance and single database, you will only have the latest versions with some compatibility level. So like I said, it's going to be 100. It's very easy to migrate from existing VM or existing physical server to a VM. But when we're talking about managed instances or single database or elastic pool, you may need to re-architect where your database is placed. And I'm going to show later more about that. With VM, you have a private IP address with Azure VNet. Okay. On managed instance, you have VNet as well, so you have the same one. But on single database and elastic pool, you have to build the security with endpoints. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's feasible as well. You have the ability to deploy other applications and services on a VM, but you cannot do that with the PaaS. So let's talk. So with PaaS, we have online changes of resources, so CPU storage per your managed instance and per your single database. And you also have automatic tuning. So automatic tuning, that means you can tell SQL Server, you can tell the engine to create or change indexes. So if it's scary for you, you don't have to let the engine do that, but you can get it as a report. So with PaaS, because everything is managed by Microsoft, they give you a little bit more tools even for tuning. So you can see resources by database, where on the VM you can see resources per the entire VM. With PaaS you can see the resource utilization per database. Okay, so you have a little bit more granularity and help via tools with the PaaS. So those are the basic differences. Let's talk about limitations. So the VM, we have SQL Server instances with up to 64 terabytes of storage, while managed services is up to 8. And single database can go up to 100 terabyte database. Here you have 32,767 database per instance, and you see this up to 100 database per instance with managed instance. So that means that if you want to lift and shift an instance with more than 100 databases and or more than 8 terabytes, you cannot just lift and shift. You will have to place the database differently and have more managed instances than the current SQL Server instances that you have on-prem. In an elastic pool, it could be up to 5,000 databases per server. Now, with PaaS, what you get is a logical server. So it really, it depends which region you chose and which tier you chose for your databases. So for example, when I did a project for a Canadian customer, they needed to keep the data in Canada. We couldn't go to 5,000 databases per elastic pool, for example. We could only go up to, I think it was 3,000. So it really depends where you're placing your databases and which tier. So SQL Server on VM supports cross-database queries with 3-part names. Also manage instances because it's very close to SQL Server instance. But unfortunately, with single database or elastic pool, the database cannot talk to each other within the database. However, the application can connect to as many databases as it wishes, but not, for example, from a database. So we cannot have a view that is calling an object in another database because the database doesn't see other databases. So from the price comparison, I already talked about that. If you need to convince management, or if you are management and you need to decide if to go to Azure, don't just look at the prices per hour or prices per 1 year or 2 years, because there are so many things to look at, like hardware and infrastructure, also purchasing and renewing, because the hardware becomes old fast these days. The technical team supporting the infrastructure and hardware, the recurring costs such as electricity in your data center, or if you are hosting your environment somewhere, those are the costs. Backup and recovery, or high availability, disaster recovery, and security. And you need to, when you do a price comparison, you need to choose the features that you need and then choose the option. And then you have usage per month. You need to calculate that. You can calculate that. You can use resource pools, okay, to save costs, like Elastic Pool. And you can shut down the servers or scale up and down to save on cost, which you cannot do on premises. So this is the link to the price calculator, and I would like to just show you quickly how it works. So I'm going to go to the demo. So clicking on the link that I showed you in the previous slide, this is what you see. Okay, so you can see that you can calculate the price based on, for example, the virtual machine. and other things that we don't cover here, but also Azure SQL Database. So let's start with Azure Virtual Machine, sorry. So I want to add one, and you see virtual machine added, so I can either do view or I can go down here, and you can see I can choose the region where my VM is going to be. Which operating system? Obviously it can be Linux as well now when we have support. Is it going to be operating system only or SQL Server? So SQL Server. And we can bring which license do we need? Maybe we only need standard. Okay. Which tier we want to be at? Basic, standard. Okay. So you see in West US, these are the things that we can do. Let's try to get East US and see if we have other tiers that we can choose. So here also basic and standard. Okay. And these are the things that we can choose. So you see there are a lot in that standard, in that tier, we have a lot of options. So what we can see here is how many cores, how much RAM, and how much temporary storage. And this is per hour. So let's say that we're choosing something here because we know which machine we're going to use, because it's going to be more or less like what we use on-prem. And then you see we have pay-as-you-go, or you can have 1 year reserved or 3 years reserved, and you can save cost by that. And you decide how many machines you have, and you have additional things to configure, and at the end you will get the total price. So the price is per hour. Sorry, the price is per month. Okay, so we have the price per month. And this, once you have everything, so you can add additional virtual machine, you can clone, you can delete one, so you can play with that, you can change the tier and so forth. And you can add additional options, like you can add some SQL databases, elastic pools, and so forth. So this is the price calculator. Let's go back and let's add a SQL database. Okay, so we have the virtual machine, and then you have another virtual machine, and then you have your Azure database. Okay, because I already play with that, so I get all my machines already saved for me on this browser. So here again, I can choose the region. Do I need managed instance, elastic pool, or single database? Okay, and by the way, you do have a link to see the limitations for each region for each option. So you decide what you want. You want vCore or DTU, how many cores, is it general purpose, and everything that we have discussed. So you need to learn before what you actually need for each one of those. And here too, you have pay-as-you-go 1 year and 3 years. Per database, they can tell you how much you're going to be saving if you use, because pay-as-you-go, the assumption is that you're going to be using all the resources. Okay, so this is the price calculator. Let's go back to the presentation. So we're back to the presentation. Here you have also a link to the older DTU calculator. This was the first model that was provided, and then Microsoft added the vCore. So the DTU calculator, because it was very hard to understand how to calculate the DTUs, Microsoft provided this tool where you only have to track with Performance Monitor those 4 metrics, let's say for 2 days or 1 week, and then you can upload your CSV file, and this calculator will tell you how many DTUs you need. So how long you're going to monitor this, it's up to you depending on your activity. So if you think that 2 days are going to give you a good understanding of the load that you have on that server, just take it for 2 days. If you think that it's a week, then take it for a week. You can also decide to do 2 days here, 2 days there, and then compare and see which DTU you need. So where do we start? So now that we know all this information and there's a lot more, where do we start? So the first thing to do is that Microsoft provided the Data Migration Assistant, or DMA. This is a tool that you can download for free and on any machine that has the ability to connect to your database servers. And then you can just run this and see. So this is what replaces the SQL Server Upgrade Advisor, but now you also have the Azure SQL Database and SQL Database Managed Instance, because what it will do, it will go through all your instances and all your databases, not the code from the application, but only database on the database side. So if you have ad hoc queries, they're not going to be covered, okay? And it will tell you if you have features that are being used that will be migration blockers. So let's say that you decided to go to Azure SQL Database. You run this DMA on your instance and it will tell you, let's say, okay, you know what, you have cross-database queries. You cannot migrate like that. Or you have some security configurations that you cannot migrate. So it will give you a report for any of those. So those are the sources and those are the targets. And then you can decide if you would like to move to that option or not. And also, because this is not enough, you did not check the application, you need to do a proof of concept. So let's say if you just decided to move to the same VMs, I don't think you need the proof of concept. The proof of concept will be more targeted to network and security and stuff, more generic stuff. But if you decided to go to a singleton database or to Elastic Pool, you need to verify that your application code and application can actually work with that scenario. And this is it. I finished with the presentation, and now I will give it back to the moderator to open to discussion and QA. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Michelle. We do have a couple questions here that we can go through and then kind of wrap things up. So the first question is if they're using Azure SQL Database to persist the data, is there a way to use SSRS with that environment without putting SSRS on a local server or on a Azure VM? Is there a PaaS solution for reporting services right now?
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So a PaaS solution for reporting services, that's a question?
Yes.
Okay, so not that I know of, but I'm not completely sure. I don't think this is a I think that, well, managed instances is a new thing. So I'm not sure. Maybe with managed instances you can, but I'm almost sure that no. But it's something that I can research.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is a question that we get quite a bit, and it's definitely a hole in the Microsoft's Azure story, because they used to have that managed service, and then they kind of killed that off a few years ago, and they haven't replaced it quite yet that I've been able to see.
Yeah, I think that Microsoft is targeting more towards Power BI.
Yep.
Right. So yeah, you need to always remember that Microsoft makes changes all the time. So even if I tell you, okay, it's not possible, maybe tomorrow it will be. So we just need to follow.
Right.
But it's a very good question.
Yeah, and then we do have a question about whether the slides in the recording will be available, and yes, they will be. I'll actually be posting those up. I've got them available already. I just needed the event to be finished in order to do that. And then Rajesh had a few questions about DTU. But I think at the end you kind of covered a lot of that. Rajesh, if you'd have any additional questions regarding DTU, because the basic question was, what is DTU based on? Nope, he says he's good. All right. Yeah, I kind of thought that end piece had covered the question that he had posed.
Yeah, and you can always email me in the presentation, the first slide, there's my email address, so you can always email me, or you can find me on LinkedIn and ask me questions. If I can help, it will be my pleasure.
Sounds great. Okay, with that, we don't have any more questions, so I'm going to close out for today. Thank you, Michelle, for presenting. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and hopefully we will see everyone back in the webcast next week. Thank you.